大家好, I'm Nathan Rich, aka 火锅大王. Today I want to talk to you about this situation with Sunyang, the professional swimmer from China. I'm sure you know by now that Sunyang has just recently been banned for 8 years from participating in swimming events. A lot of what I'm seeing on the internet says that, oh, he's a doper, which is actually quite disingenuous because he's not even being accused of doping. He also recently announced that he will be appealing the decision. And so I am making this video for Sunyang's legal team. Please take a look. First, let's take a look at the timeline of events as I understand them. This is based off of testimony from Sunyang, video footage, testimony from other people. So this is not 100% accurate, but this is the best that we can do being so far away from the situation. When he was 16, he was prescribed a drug for his heart condition. This drug was not banned or forbidden for any professional athletes anywhere. In his career, he got approximately 180 blood and urine tests. Now, the trouble with Sunyang basically started when he was 21 years old. He got rear-ended by a bus driver, and then it turned out that he didn't have a license when he was driving. He went to jail for a week, and this event is actually really important because if you look into the details of when he was in jail, you can see some of his psychology and his mental state. Sunyang refused to eat any of the meat products provided. Sun was worried that chemical additives typically added to meat could interfere with his health or later doping tests. Think about the level of paranoia that you have to have about testing. You won't even eat the meat at all. You're terrified to eat it because you don't want to fail a doping test. To me, so far, this sounds like someone who isn't doping and is terrified of seeming like a doper. Then in 2014, the drug he was prescribed is now banned. And just a few months later, he tests positive for that drug. Then he's banned for 3 months. They conceded it seemed likely that Sunyang did not know that he was violating a rule since they had just recently banned it. And here's something from 2017 that very few people understand. But before I can explain this to you, I need to explain how the testing works for these athletes. You have FINA, and FINA will hire another company, and that company will basically hire individual contractors who are licensed to go around and do the testing. So FINA is responsible for the testing. They outsource that to another company. That company essentially hires freelancers. WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, they're kind of like the police for this. They investigate and audit FINA to make sure that FINA is following all the right policies. When you're an athlete and you get tested, this is the way that it works. Every day you have to report to them where you will be for at least 1 hour that day. Doesn't mean that they show up, but they always need an hour window so that they can randomly show up and test you during that time. Now, how do they actually test you? There's a DCO, which is basically the head of that particular testing unit, the doping control officer. And then they'll have like a DCA, which is a doping control assistant. And then you also have like a BCA, which would be a blood collecting assistant. So this is somebody who's more specialized in getting blood, right? A nurse, for example. Normally, 2 people will be doing the testing. In 2017, he is tested by a DCO and a DCA. The DCA, the assistant, is a particular lady. At the time, they don't get along with each other, and he formally complains that this lady didn't have the proper identification, didn't have the proper authorization. It's not exactly clear, but he made a complaint saying this lady wasn't properly prepared. Right around August 20, 2018, Sunyang was drug tested, and he passed the test. Then, here are the events on September 4th, 2018. This white area, this is the availability hour that he gave them. He told them that between 10 and 11 at night is his availability hour, and he'll be at an athlete's villa. This doesn't mean that he was expecting a visit that day. Every single day he needs to provide them with an hour. On this particular day, 4 testers came, a DCO, a DCA, a BCA, and someone else. They arrive at 10:02 p.m. Sunyang is not immediately available. He arrives at 10:58 p.m. and then they all go together to this clubhouse where they're going to do the testing. When Sunyang sees these people, he recognizes the DCO as the lady that he knew a year before as an assistant. And she's got a female blood collector, a female assistant, and a guy. You have to have a man there because the man needs to watch the athlete urinate to verify that it's a valid test. Sunyang gives blood to the BCA, and he notices the man is taking pictures of him, which is totally unprofessional and very weird. Then the guy starts telling Sunyang that he's a fan of his and wants his autograph. And so Sunyang says, basically, who's this guy? Be professional. You need the proper license, authority, proof, evidence, papers. Everything has to be totally legit from you guys. The DCO tells Sunyang, oh, this is a primary school friend of mine. He's just literally some guy that the DCO knew and just brings him along to have some guy taking pictures of him who wants to follow him into the bathroom. For some reason, that seemed a little unprofessional to him. He finished the blood test while he was realizing that there's literally some random person in his house taking part in this. So then he starts really pushing back. We already know that he's argued with this lady before, so clearly they already don't get along. Sunyang's mom is also jumping in saying, whoa, what is this? You know, my son is an athlete, he's a star. I'm sure she's saying all this kind of stuff. You can't just have some homeless guy coming off the street. So they start getting into it. The DCO is panicking and calling people, calling her superiors, trying to figure out what to do. And Sunyang is saying, look, I need to see the credentials and the authorization and the authority letters, all these different things. He's asking for what he normally sees from these people, which is a letter that shows, here's me, I'm the DCO, this is me. Here's you, this is your name. This is saying that we are authorized to do tests on you. He's demanding to see the papers that say his name and their names and that everything is being done by the book. So the DCO shows him her information and she checks out. The other people's information is very shoddy. It's not what it's normally supposed to be. And the guy, literally, he's just, oh, here's my ID. I mean, here's who I am. So he has no authority, no authorization to be there. So Sunyang and his family basically are panicking now. If somebody is doing these tests that's not authorized, you're opening yourself up to a huge amount of legal risk. So Sunyang is sending the pictures that the DCO is giving to him to his doctor, to the leader of the China Swimming Association. He's calling the Zhejiang Association. He's calling everyone he knows, calling his doctor. His doctor's calling another doctor. They're calling the head of the hospital. They're calling everybody to find out, what am I supposed to do? They're not prepared. They have some guy. They don't seem to have the normal thing that they bring with them. Somewhere around 11:45 at night, according to Sunyang, and I haven't seen this confirmed or even denied by the other side, but according to Sunyang, the DCO agrees to give him the blood and say, okay, fine, here, you can take the blood. There are 2 vials of blood that they took from him. And this is one very important thing for any follow-up cases, maybe for the appeal, although the terms of the appeal are quite strict. But Sunyang says he offered to wait with them while somebody else can show up who's properly authorized. And the DCO turned it down. So at this point, Sunyang is saying, I'm not giving you the urine test. And he's saying, I'm not letting you leave with the blood test. Sunyang's doctor actually arrives and says he believes neither the DCO nor the DCA were properly accredited. So if you're Sunyang, you have your doctor, you have the head of the hospital, Zhejiang Association, the leader of the China Swimming Association. You're calling all these people and all of them are telling you there's something wrong with these guys, don't do the test. If you're in that situation, what are you going to do? What they decided to do was sign an agreement at 2:50 a.m. So it's very late at night now. Everybody's, I'm sure, had a crappy evening. So they signed this agreement that basically says, we are not going to finish this test because I don't agree that this is correctly done and you can't leave with the blood. The DCO then warns him that if their team isn't able to leave with the blood containers, it could constitute an anti-doping rules violation. She doesn't specifically say that it will. So then basically what happens is Sunyang's team essentially destroys one of the vials with a hammer. The other vial is not destroyed, by the way. Sun's mom takes away all the stuff and everybody dissipates. So that's the event as it happened. No one is actually accusing Sunyang of doping. He's accused of destroying this blood sample when it shouldn't have been destroyed. So that was September 4th. In January, there's a FINA panel. FINA doesn't do the testing. They hire another company. And they also don't do these investigations. They hire some people on a panel. and those people do the investigations and submit the results to FINA. That panel, who was 3 people, Robert Fox from Switzerland, Farid Ben Belkacem from Algeria, and David Lech from Canada. Robert Fox is the actual chairman of the panel, so obviously they're taking this pretty seriously. And the FINA panel says, Sunyang has not committed an anti-doping rule violation. IDTM, who's the testing company that hires this group of testers, that FINA hires, had breached several rules, including failing to produce authorization letters and a nursing license. And Sunyang was warned that he took a huge and foolish gamble by smashing the 1 vial of blood. And they concluded that the BCA was not qualified. And by the way, neither the DCA nor the DCO even showed up for this. So it seems like they knew that they had screwed up. So FINA accepts the ruling, but WADA, they're described on that day as furious. Here in March, WADA says, yes, it has filed an appeal. And then here on the 15th of November, 2019, we finally have the hearing. I've watched the entire thing. It's about 2.5 hours long. It's excruciatingly painful to watch. There's a number of problems with it. The number one problem that any Chinese-speaking or English-speaking person can determine immediately is that the Chinese translator that they have is absolutely horrible. The worst translator probably in the entire world. They have a guy who's won 22 gold medals, basically on trial for his entire career, and all they could find is some lady who barely speaks either language. Sunyang doesn't understand what they're talking about almost at all. On the 19th of November, it was revealed that the guy who was taking pictures of him, he's actually just a construction worker that knew the DCO. And just a few days ago, they released the verdict. Sunyang is banned for 8 years from participating in sporting events. So how did they get this 8 years number? It seems extreme given the circumstances. I watched the court case, I've listened to testimony, I've watched videos, I've read articles, I've done a lot of research, and I'm going to show you exactly how they got to that number and what I think can be done about it. So this is the Court of Arbitration for Sport release. It says he violated Article 2.5 of doping control regulations, tampering with any part of doping control. He is not being accused of doping. So why is it 8 years? Well, this says in 2014 he was found guilty of his first anti-doping rule violation. So in accordance with Article 10.7.1 FINA doping control, an 8-year period of ineligibility has been imposed. So here's what Article 10.7.1 says. For your second anti-doping rule violation, the period of ineligibility shall be the greater of. So whatever's the maximum of these 3 things. We don't have to talk about the first 2 because they're not the maximum. So it's the third one. 2 times the period of ineligibility otherwise applicable to the second anti-doping rule violation, treated as if it were a first violation without any discounts. Double the normal amount for this. What's the normal amount for a violation like this? So to find that out, we have to go to DC 10, sanctions on individuals. The period of ineligibility shall be 4 years. Okay, so 4 years doubled is 8 years. Unless the athlete or other person can establish that the anti-doping rule violation was not intentional. So this is something that I'm sure lawyers are focusing on, because it doesn't seem like this was an intentional violation to me. To me, it sounds like these people came, didn't have their stuff together, it wasn't being done professionally. All these people he was calling, these professionals, were telling him to abort, and so he panicked and aborted. That's what it sounds like to me. There's still a lot of room for legal interpretation here. Sunyang will appeal it, and the grounds for appeal include an unfair hearing, which, to me, this is very unfair because he didn't understand what anyone's saying. Basically, Sunyang's point, when he can finally get pieces of it across, because he can barely understand anything that they're saying to him because the translator is so horrible, basically his point is, I'm just an athlete. These people came to me. They didn't have the normal paperwork that they usually have, and everyone that I called told me to abort this thing, so I tried to abort it. That's basically his defense. After that, they start calling in other people, and they talk to a WADA person. The lawyers and this WADA guy get into the technicalities of, well, WADA has these rules, and then they also have these best practices. And this court establishes that those people had followed the minimum rules and that they had some paperwork, but they hadn't followed the best practices. But as far as WADA's concerned, well, too bad, you know, we did the bare minimum. So if you listen to the translation problems, there are just tons of them.
Are you at tab 5?
是的，
是的。
Yes, I do.
If this girl can't even figure out how to say yes I am and instead says yes I do, how do you think she's going to translate this question, for example?
You've asked for a public hearing, Mr. Sunyang. You've filed no less than 8 witness statements. What we want to hear from you today, this morning, in direct examination is a very summary account of some events which took place in September 2018. So I'd like to take you to the evening of the 4th of September 2018. Can you please describe what happened when the officers who came to test you arrived?
Or what about this translation in which she literally just seems to be making up words that aren't English at all?
I tend to have a tendency to faint if I leak into the blood.
So the WADA guy earlier on talked about customary actions, basically what's the normal thing that happens. And he's then asked this question.
Know if IDTM has produced or what has produced any regulations or rules or document that attests, that confirms the practice from IDTM.
The lawyer seems to be trying to establish if IDTM had created actual rules based on the best practices of WADA. Because if those were actual rules, then that could have been a rules violation from them. I know this is a little confusing, but there's a point to this. He asked that question. And the answer WADA gave, to me, opens up potentially a new defense.
We evaluate the practices of international federations and national anti-doping organizations. We did conduct an audit of FINA recently, and this practice did not come up as an issue whatsoever.
WADA basically just said, well, we're the ones who do the investigations. We do the audits, and we audited FINA, and this issue didn't come up. It's not exactly clear what he means by that. Either he means that normally all of the companies that FINA hires to do the testing, normally they do follow these best practices. Or he means they kind of just do whatever they want, and as long as they're doing something between the rules and the best practices, it's never really been an issue for the athletes, to which I would hazard a guess to say that that sounds ridiculous. All professional athletes in the world are just totally fine with literally construction workers with no qualifications at all coming into bathrooms and watching them urinate. That seems extremely, astronomically unlikely that there isn't an issue with that. But if he means the other thing, if what he means is, well, normally this isn't an issue because these subcontracted workers normally do show all this evidence of with their name and the other person's name and all these best practices that WADA says aren't technically required. If that's normally the case, then there's, I think, a stronger defense for Sunyang, because from Sunyang's point of view, we know he's been tested 180 times. So if you can establish that of those 180 times, the vast majority of them or all of them were done in one way, and then suddenly they're done in a different way with no notification to the athlete, then I think that's a pretty strong defense for his actions to say it's unreasonable to expect that athletes will accept a sudden, massive decline in the standard of people testing them, with his professional team apparently not knowing that these very, very low minimum standards is what WADA will accept. Next question they ask WADA seems to tell me they don't really think of this as a valid argument. He basically just asked in another way and then kind of said, well, no further questions. To me, that opens up the possibility of exposing it's an unreasonable expectation that athletes should just allow anyone who comes with the DCO to go and watch them in the bathroom. You get this one lady who you've already argued with, and she comes with a construction worker friend of hers to come watch you in the bathroom, and unqualified other people, the whole thing's a mess. She's got a bad attitude. You know, you're in a bad mood, it's late at night, you don't want to be dealing with this. It seemed like they were fighting and arguing, and that devolved into Sunyang and his team trying to abort the entire thing based on the recommendations of his professional team. Everyone he talked to and called said the same thing to him. And I don't even think anyone's disputing that. So the question is it just to ban someone for 8 years when it is absolutely proven and not even contested that the people showing up were not all qualified, and there's no reasonable doubt that he's clean because he was tested very shortly before and very shortly after, and he's totally clean. So No one's accusing him of doping. They're only accusing him of violating the doping control. And the doping control, they themselves barely scraped by on the incredibly low standards that WADA holds as their minimum, which is essentially anyone can show up to your house, they have a piece of paper that doesn't identify them, doesn't identify you, and just you're expected to follow what they tell you to do. If I were a lawyer in this case, I would take a look at appealing based on unfair hearing, because it's very clear to anyone with eyes that Sunyang does not clearly understand the questions. He answers questions they didn't ask. The translations are just absolutely horrible. That's the first thing I would do. Then I would go after reducing the base 4 years that Sunyang would otherwise get for this infraction to 2 years if you can prove that it wasn't intentional. I don't think that it's reasonable to assume that he intentionally tried to violate the standards. I think that the evidence shows he intentionally took his actions, but he was doing that based on he had expected that the entire thing was null and void. That would at least reduce his base to 2 years, which would reduce his ban to 4 years. If this is allowed to go as it is, this will expose athletes across the world to a very dangerous situation. Because now I can just call up any DCO and say, hey, I'll give you a little money if you let me meet Sunyang or some other famous athlete. And then I can just go over there, take pictures with him, try to get an autograph, go watch him in the bathroom, do whatever I want. I'm just some guy with no accreditation, and I don't have to fear anything bad happening to me, because if that athlete gets out of line, he's banned. So to me, I don't see a doper. I see a person who is obsessed with not doping. It's interesting to hear the Australian swimmers who are absolutely proven to be dopers name-calling Sunyang as a doper when in fact he's not even accused of doping. It's a crazy world out there. So I hope that the lawyers for Sunyang can see this. Maybe they've already thought of these things, I don't know. But I did watch that hearing, and it didn't seem like anybody really picked up on that nuanced item, which is if everything is normally one way, that is usually a pretty good defense. At least a defense for it wasn't intentional, which would reduce his ban in half. And if what they're saying is, oh, they just sort of randomly do it and we never have these problems, I mean, that's impossible. If you have people showing up who treat you like trash and aren't qualified and are some construction workers, and they want to go watch you in the bathroom, you think no athlete complains about that? That's totally unrealistic, and I think it would be easy to disprove that. There's still hope for Sunyang to reduce his ban or even get it reversed altogether. And it's not hope based on trickery, it's hope based on the real facts. So please, everybody, help me spread this message, and hopefully his lawyers will see this, and maybe they already know this stuff, but who knows, it could be helpful. So thanks, everybody. 谢谢.